Meet Gene Wolfe's The Book of the New Sun, a science fantasy tetralogy, originally written as one large novel but published as 4 separate volumes between 1980 and 1983. The Shadow of the Torturer, The Claw of the Conciliator, The Sword of the Lictor, and The Citdale of the Autarch. The Book of the New Sun tells the story of Severian through Gene Wolfe's found translation of his memoir, starting as an apprentice and later journeyman of the Order of the Seekers for Truth and Pestilence, more commonly known as the Guild of Torturers, those who have been trained their whole life to dish out the corporal punishment mandated by the Autarch or others in power. The Autarch is the supreme leader of the Commonwealth in this future version of Urth with a U. Far future because the sun has been described as dying and red and dim. I personally have not yet read Jack Vance's Dying Earth series, which Gene Wolfe was heavily influenced by. Let me sell you on the Book of the New Sun here. There are 2 ways to go about this. The first way is to be as vague as Gene Wolfe is with the Book of the New Sun, or I guess technically Severian is, when describing his experiences on Earth. I will tell you that it is a deep, thought-provoking science fantasy adventure, one full of mystery and magic. It's a bit dense with wonderful yet thought-provoking prose, with a plot that sort of unravels like a large knotted ball of yarn, sometimes quickly and exciting, and other times you hit a knot and can't go any further, so you have to start at the other end and you keep going until you hit knots and going back and forth. That's kind of how I felt while I was reading the Book of the New Sun. For some of you, that might be enough to just go and read, so you can stop here. But I know you're probably like me, and if you clicked on this video, you want to know more about this series. So technically, I guess the rest of the video may include some spoilers, but honestly, I don't think you can be spoiled by the Book of the New Sun without the context of what's going on. It's more about Severian's journey than the destination, as cliche as that sounds. You know, without context, the plot points themselves, I don't feel are too much of spoilers, because I could tell you that X happens to this character and this scenario happens, but there's really a deeper meaning behind all of that. So knowing that a certain situation happens doesn't really spoil anything, in my opinion. I would say that the extent of my spoilers wouldn't be more than knowing the fact that Tor, the publisher, originally released the Book of the New Sun under its Fantasy Masterworks line and later in its science fiction Masterworks line. But regardless, you have been warned. Severian is a young man in his 20s, a bit younger actually at the beginning of The Shadow of the Torturer in the first chapter. And he is exiled from his guild's headquarters because he shows compassion to one of their clients, Thekla, a woman he falls in love with. Being unable to cast judgment themselves, the leader of the Torturers Guild simply banishes Severian to the city of Thrax to work as a lictor of the city, basically one who will dole out punishment in name of the guild with his newly acquired sword Terminus Est. The plot of the Book of the New Sun really shines when we accompany Severian on his journey to and beyond Thrax. Allies, lovers, duels, magical artifacts. Hell, Severian even performs in a play from a traveling playwright. The deeper the reader goes into the Book of the New Sun, the weirder things start to get. Remember, this is a first-person memoir. Severian has never been outside of his guild before. He's never seen the greater world, and there are a lot of weird things out there. Not just creatures and magic, but customs of how people live. This is a far future world, and Severian does his best to explain what he's seeing to the reader. Think of him as a medieval peasant who stumbles upon a submarine. Now, this peasant will try to describe what he's seeing, not only just the submarine, but the technology that's inside, with his limited vocabulary of what the hell a screen might be, or powered lights. This might be part of the reason why people sort of consider the Book of the New Sun a difficult read, because you're trying to decipher what Severian is actually saying and describing. But I think that's part of the whole fun of reading the whole book. And since this is a first-person narrative, Descriptions of it typically give Severian the tag of the unreliable narrator. And I get it. Severian is a torturer, someone that hurts people for a living. He inflicts pain and punishment and sometimes even death by beheading those when he needs some coin on the road. He's able to do this because he's technically an emissary of justice because he is a lictor. Being banished from his guild doesn't relieve him of his duties. But this makes sense to me to leave certain things out that may paint Severian in a negative light, because it is revealed pretty early on that he is the current Autarch of Urth. Often chapters or volumes end on cliffhangers and pick up completely in a different scenario, days, weeks down the line. Severian doesn't want the intended reader of this book that he wrote, this memoir of his, this autobiography, to know certain things. I don't particularly love the unreliable narrator tag that Severian gets, because he's just interpreting the things that he's seeing. I also don't think he's really the sharpest tool in the shed. He's definitely not a great person, but he may be using this to redeem himself a bit. Regardless, I found myself liking him enough that I was rooting for his success. You know, you have to understand that the world of Urth is not all sunshine and rainbows. One thing I have to mention is that very early on, Severian mentions to the reader that he possesses a perfect memory, where he is able to remember everything that's ever happened to him in his life, but he will make mistakes, sometimes pages in between. You will see one character holding a spear, and then he says it's another character that was holding it, little things like that are easy to miss. But he kind of hammers this over your head that he has a perfect memory and everything, all the events have happened exactly as he's writing it, but he will make mistakes that you can definitely pick out. So yeah, Severian doesn't know everything that's going on in this world, and he will contradict himself. There's a quote from Neil Gaiman: "The more deeply you delve into the Book of the New Sun, the more it will repay the delving." I see many hesitant to recommend the Book of the New Sun because it's a hard, dense read. It's painfully slow because it's filled with difficult and archaic words. And I think we should unpack this a bit here. First off, yes, the Book of the New Sun I found to be a slow read. It took me 4 months to read. Granted, I was not trying to rip through it, and I took breaks here and there because there's kind of a lot going on. But there were absolutely times where I could not put the book down, where I just wanted to stay up even at 1, 2 a.m. to just read a few more pages or another chapter because I was excited to see what happened. But often I would be stopped in my tracks because you would come across a word such as destrier instead of warhorse, or smilodon instead of just saying like a large saber-toothed cat. In between volumes, Gene Wolfe does kind of write to you, the reader, that he's doing his best to interpret this found book of Severian. And many times there are not words that exist for what Severian is describing. So Gene kind of looks into the books of history to find words that are similar to help you, the reader, understand what Severian is claiming to have seen. Now, why sometimes Gene just doesn't say riding a horse or war horse, there might be reasons. Maybe it's not actually a horse as we know it. That's something I've come to start thinking about since I finished the book. But there are some archaic terms for different weaponry. What I found helpful actually was reading on Kindle, because you can very easily just hold on a word and a description will pop up, a definition. So because of that, I recommend reading the Book of the New Sun your first time through. And yes, you will want to read this multiple times, but read the first time through if you can on a Kindle. Now, because there are so many of these archaic words, there are some books that serve you with chapter guides. I think there's 2 authors that have chapter guides. And there's also a book called Lexicon Urthis by Michael Andre Drissi. That is a dictionary for all of these archaic words and some of the made-up words by Gene Wolfe in the story, or Severian. But please do not feel the need to buy these books for your first time through, especially Lexicon Urthis. I'm excited to use that for my second read-through, but for a first read-through, it will explain words, unfortunately, with massive spoilers for events, and I don't think it's necessary for the first time through. And to be honest, most of the time that I looked up words was in the first book, The Shadow of the Torturer, just because there was so much that Severian is running into, animals and items and weaponry. But after a while, I honestly started to just get the gist of what Gene Wolfe was saying and understood that, okay, he's talking about a sword. I don't need to stop reading to look up exactly what it looks like. Sometimes I did, but I don't know. Sometimes it's just fine to skip ahead. And like, I get it. He's talking about a giant animal, or he's talking about some type of house or a dagger. Like, you just kind of go on. You fall into a good groove and you get the gist of what Gene or Severian is trying to say. The prose is very descriptive, but often dreamlike, and I never found that I really had a problem understanding what was going on, with those archaic words notwithstanding. And it's interesting thinking about it, that the stance that the Book of the New Sun, or maybe Gene Wolfe's writing in general, I've only read these 4 volumes so far, that he's difficult to read, maybe says something more about the product that authors are putting out today and what we're reading and consuming in general. But maybe that's probably a video for another time. If I had one complaint, it would be that these page-turning chapters were often halted by other stories themselves inside the Book of the New Sun. What I mean is that Severian actually carries around with him an ancient book that he wound up acquiring. There are stories, ancient stories, and multiple times throughout the whole series, he reads from them to another character, and for a whole chapter. So obviously these stories have a reason to be there, whether they be allegory or symbolism. Some even say that very literally you need to read the words because it explains things earlier or later on in the book. I just found them difficult to decipher a bit. You know, there's even, I mentioned earlier that Severian runs into, multiple times, he runs into a playwright, a traveling troupe, and performs with them. And at one point, there's a chapter that is just the playwright's play, just out of nowhere, as we're reading the play. And the first time through, I was kind of annoyed because personally, I don't like reading plays. I was forced to read them in high school, maybe some in college, and I just don't enjoy them. I didn't really enjoy this one either, but I kind of understand now that it was there for a reason. Just know that there's a lot to find and interpret. Gene Wolfe had a love for classics and folklore, the Bible even. There are many parallels and homage throughout the whole Book of the New Sun. I picked up on a little bit of it. Those of you who are more well-read than me, I guess, if you just read a lot of classics and know a lot, you might actually have a better time finding some of these parallels. There's a quote that I've found a few times from Gene Wolfe. My definition of good literature is that which can be read by an educated reader and reread with increased pleasure. So yes, much of it may have gone over my head. It may go over your head if you haven't read it yet, but I think that's part of the point, because as Gene Wolfe believes, you should reread good literature, and I'm excited to do so. It's not often, or honestly ever, have I thought, while I'm still reading a book, I can't wait to reread this. Going back around to my opening statement about Demon Souls or Elden Ring, the more I read the Book of the New Sun, the more I understood the recommendation that I found to read it, because you're journeying with Severian through this world and you're encountering strange things and piecing it together one by one, and it's pretty deep and starts to blow your mind the more you figure out. There's plenty to discover, and I'm reminded a little bit of Mark Danielewski's House of Leaves. In my opinion, that book is not worth reading, not worth the hype. Wasn't creepy, more of an experiment, but I digress. What reminded me of it is that when I finished House of Leaves, I sort of started looking into some theories, because there's a lot of hidden messages and hidden elements throughout that whole book, and I almost wanted to start digging in, but I just honestly thought that House of Leaves wasn't good enough to waste my time with that. For Book of the New Sun, I definitely want to dig in deeper and find more. And there's a lot out there to look up. But honestly, I've kind of kept myself from that for the most part because I'm excited to reread it for myself and see what I can pick up on the second time around. So if extended world building is your thing, then Gene Wolfe has you covered. The Book of the New Sun is actually part of the greater solar cycle, which includes the sequel, Urth of the New Sun, which is a sequel or a fifth volume. I've read that Gene Wolfe sort of wrote that to help tie up loose ends because a lot of people were confused of what they read with the Book of the New Sun originally. But after that, there is also more works in the same universe, the Book of the Long Sun and its direct sequel, the Book of the Short Sun, which both take place way before the events in the New Sun. I'm personally waiting to go and read Urth of the New Sun until I reread the first four volumes of the Book of the New Sun. Then I'll move on to Long Sun and Short Sun. And there actually are some short stories sprinkled in Gene Wolfe's works that are in the solar cycle universe. And if you're really into everything, sort of with those extra books, Lexicon Earthis, those chapter summaries, there's, I believe, 2 podcasts that break down chapter by chapter or 2 chapters at a time, each chapter of the Book of the New Sun. As I think you can tell, I love the Book of the New Sun. It is not perfect, but I think I have found my new favorite novel or series, whatever you want to call it. It really is full of mind-blowing revelations and just things I didn't expect. I'm obviously left with tons of questions, but that's fine. To give it a rating, I would give Book of the New Sun a 5 out of 5. The volumes themselves, I think the 2 and 3 in the middle were the best. Those were 5 out of 5s for me, and their book ended 1 and 4. I gave them 4s out of 5s. Not perfect, mostly because the first book included some stories which pulled me from the action of what was going on. And the fourth book, while it had some amazing reveals, there's a bunch of chapters about a war that honestly wasn't the most interesting, but I understand why it's there. Fantasy and science fiction collide with truly terrifying monster encounters, sword and sorcery, time travel, elder gods, cults, aliens, robots, and war, to name a few. Now, I did start reading the Book of the New Sun before Noelle and I started this channel, so I did not take extensive notes, which is probably what my second reading will be for. So whenever I do that, I don't know if that's going to be anytime soon, maybe within this year. Eventually expect some more videos or maybe video essays on that. Just do yourself a favor, and if you enjoy fantasy and or sci-fi, read the Book of the New Sun. I'm 2 novels past that, and I'm still thinking about it pretty much every day. I've never really encountered a story like this before, other than maybe Chrono Trigger or the Star Ocean series. If you have any recommendations for me that are maybe similar or sound similar to the Book of the New Sun, or maybe the lore of Soulsborne games, Elden Ring, Bloodborne, Dark Souls, Demon Souls, please let me know. Another novel that came up in my searches was Christopher Buehlman's Between Two Fires, which I will read at some point soon. So let me know if you've read that. In my head, I keep thinking Between Two Fires is like between two bonfires from Dark Souls. I'm Billy, and I'm going to leave you to ponder this quote from The Shadow of the Torturer. It is said that it is the peculiar quality of time to conserve fact, and that it does so by rendering our past falsehoods true.